Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn valuable tips from their lives, tips that you can apply to be the leader that you were created to be. When leaders are intentional, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I'm an author, speaker, business owner, and love being a podcast host. And we're glad to have you here with us today. Before we get rolling today, I want to encourage you all to hit that subscribe button, follow button, like button. Place your comments on there. It's a crazy world out there, and algorithms drive everything. So if you'd be so kind as to help us with those algorithms, we greatly appreciate it. Listeners, you are in for a treat today. Today, my guest is Vince Warnock. Vince is an 11-time best-selling author. He is a publisher. He is a podcast host. He is a magazine editor. In my words, Vince, you are just that serial entrepreneur. There's always something going on out there, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Oh, mate, I'm so excited to be here. I'm just absolutely looking forward to this all week. And yeah, you call it serial entrepreneur. I call it ADHD. I just need a creative outlet all the time.
It plays either way. Hey, listeners, we're in for a treat. You can tell Vince does not have a Midwest accent. He is on the other side of the world in Australia, and he does incredible work over there. And he actually has his own podcast, Chasing the Insights. And I've had a chance to speak with his podcast listening crew. And so here's the best part about life and business for all you listeners out there. It's all about people. And when you meet people like Vince, you know that it's not just a passing in the wind. This is like, what's God doing here? Let's build these relationships because we know we can all help each other get better. So Vince, I'm excited about that. I'm excited for our listeners to get to know you. I'm just going to ask you to dive into some of your career a little bit because you've done so many different things. Typically, I'm like, hey, walk us through your professional career and leadership insights learned. But it's a conversation. But just pick up. You're into entrepreneurship. You're not afraid to step out there. How'd you get that chutzpah to jump out and start things?
Oh, man, I can tell you now. It started when I was 11. I'm just going to get dark for a second here, but I grew up in an abusive home. I really did. It was my father was a drug addict. Mum was an alcoholic. It was just a horrible environment. And one of the things I had to learn very, very early on is they're not there to look after me. They don't, I had 5 sisters and a brother, and we weren't parented most of the time. We had to look after ourselves. So learning to fend for yourself meant you had to learn some techniques. And one of those things was I need money. I mean, I was put into a caravan when I was like 7 on the property that we had because there was not enough room in the house for all the kids. So I'm put into this caravan. I'm like, okay, there's no power, there's no insulation, there's nothing. And you wake up in the middle of winter with ice on your chest. It's not a good environment. So I had to get really resilient. So I thought, that's it. I'm going to, in the middle of the night when no one can see me, I'm going to go out and dig a trench. This little wee trench to lay some wires that I got from an old scrapyard and basically powered up the caravan from under our house, and which in hindsight was probably very, very dangerous, but luckily I'm still here. But I also learned how to make money. And one of the things, for all the flaws of my parents, my father was a rubbish truck driver and a mechanic, and he would do commercial rubbish. So he would turn up at IBM and take all their stuff out, and they had imported in some Sinclair ZX81s, just to show how old I am. They're one of the first ever personal computers.
Yeah.
But they imported them to analyze them and to try and see what they can glean from them. But they had 3 of them that were faulty, so they chucked them out. And my dad's like, I have no idea what this is. He's not a very bright man. He has no idea what this is, but it's got lots of buttons. Oh, the boy can have it. So he took it home and he threw it at me and said, there you go, play with that. And I looked at this and I realized what it was, because I was totally into computers and I was fascinated by this. I used to go to the library and read, American Scientist and all these kind of magazines. And I was like, oh my goodness, I know what this is. So I tried to get them working. and realized what the problem was, that all the keys were sticky. So I'm like, okay, well, the keys weren't pressing down properly. Took them apart and managed to get them working. And I'm like, okay, this is at age 11. So I then realized I didn't want a Sinclair ZX81. I already knew what I wanted, a Commodore 64. Greatest personal computer ever.
Yep.
So I went to my school and I just asked any of my friends if they wanted to buy one of these things. And they went to their parents, and their parents were like, oh, heck yeah. So I made them enough money selling those three to buy a Commodore 64. That was my first ever business transaction. From there, and please don't judge me on this because I had no moral compass at that age. My parents were monsters. But I suddenly realized that all the software, all of the programs, all of the games that I wanted for the Commodore 64 were all on cassette tapes. And cassette tapes, if you don't know if you know this, can be copied. So I started basically a software piracy ring at age 11 and made enough money that I bought myself a VHS, a TV, heater for my caravan. Basically, I bought myself a whole pile of stuff there. Parents had no idea of any of this kind of thing. And I ran this little ring until I realized later in life that actually that's illegal and you probably shouldn't do that.
Exactly.
But it taught me that it's actually not that hard to make money. And this was something that was a really important lesson for me because prior to that, my family, everything was you had to strive. You had to strive, and then you probably weren't going to make it anyway. Everyone else had money except for us, and they didn't deserve it. We did. That was the mentality of my family. But I learned that that's not the case. That's not true at all, that you can make money. And I learned to fend for myself. So from there, my career was in and out of both entrepreneurship and corporate, and always ended up in corporate as well. And came off the back of selling. I did a stint on radio as well as an on-air announcer on one of the biggest stations back in New Zealand. And then, I ended up coming off the back of selling my largest startup. It was a multi-8-figure exit after about 3.5 years of extreme stress and anxiety. And then joined the team at Cigna Insurance and became the chief marketing officer there. So on paper, that was the dream job. I mean, I'd hit it, Sean. Pinnacle of my career. I was like, wow, I'm in a Fortune 100 company. I'm in the C-suite, and the pay's ludicrous. The bonuses are amazing. And I know all these things, by the way, because I literally sat in my office writing a list of why I should be happy with my job, but I wasn't. And I felt so ashamed of the fact, I'd been recognized by Adobe as one of the top 50 marketers in the world while I'm there, published my first book when I'm there, got to travel everywhere to speak on stages all over the world. And I was miserable. And it was because I wasn't doing the one thing that I think I'm on this planet to do, which the one thing that makes me fulfilled, and that is to help people, particularly entrepreneurs. Because I have such a soft spot because it saved my life being an entrepreneur. So it kind of led me to where I am now, and launched the podcast, the magazine, I do coaching work. We have an AI company. We've got all these things, all because I just want to help as many people as possible.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll dive into some of these different pieces. So I do want to ask you a question, though. It's not uncommon for people to go from corporate to entrepreneurship.
Yep.
You went entrepreneurship, corporate entrepreneurship.
Yep.
So that mindset, though, I mean, I understand you said you built that company. It was like intense for 3.5 years. You ended up selling out, but why did you go the corporate route? What was it that made you say, hey, this may be a better thing?
I always hate admitting this, Sean, but it was because it was kind of like a holiday. It was like, I was the CEO of that company for 3 years. I handed over the CEO-ship in the last probably 6 months because I knew I was exiting. But yeah, I was exhausted. I was traveling the world, burnt out, and I just needed to kind of reset. And I thought, if I go somewhere where I don't have to be the leader, by the way, stupid thing to think because we're leaders everywhere. But anyway, so I thought, I don't have to be the leader. So I'm going to go here to Cigna and, what am I going to be? Chief marketing officer. Oh yeah, I'm going to lead teams. Oh, wow. So, yeah.
Exactly. No, I love that though. Because if you are a leader, right, leadership is influence is behavior. So if you know those behaviors, those leadership behaviors, people will follow you. You'll draw people in. It's funny to think you went there to relax, chill out, let everybody else have that responsibility. But if you are a leader, you can't help but lead because leadership is about people and you're sharing that heart for people. And so I know you've done a lot of work in neuroscience, and I love the fact you call yourself a neuromarketer. You're into neuromarketing. Talk about that a little bit, and let's see how our listeners get intrigued by this concept.
Oh man, it's one of the most fascinating things in the world. So my training and my background was always in electronics and computer engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But then I realized how boring that was. So I didn't realize that people are way more important to me than technology. But once you understand people and technology together, that convergence becomes something like neuromarketing. And for me, it was, I would always look at things like, I would look at websites, I would look at landing pages, I would look at copy that's going out there to people, emails, all these things, and think, why do some connect with people and some not? So
Yeah.
I went on a journey of understanding the human brain. And the more you understand how the brain is wired and you understand how we make decisions, which is a core part of neuromarketing, then you understand yourself and you understand others. So it actually, even though we're there to market to people, it is a hugely powerful tool for understanding how to lead people better as well.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about leadership all the time, we're always telling people the first step of leadership, self-awareness. Second step is others awareness. You need both, but you've got to be self-aware first, because if you don't understand yourself and honestly have the drive and the initiative and the intentionality to lead yourself, you don't deserve to lead others. They don't want to follow if you can't lead yourself. So
Exactly.
this idea of neuromarketing, the human mind, I know you've really kind of taken a deep dive into it.
Yep.
And you've talked about the fact that as humans, we actually have a lot of commonality. Go into that for a little bit and how that plays out with leadership and business.
Sure. Well, one of the things I realize is I look at the decision-making process, right? And this kind of translates over into leadership very strongly. But first thing I looked at is how do we make decisions in our brain? And I'm not talking about simple transactional decision, but if they're going to buy something from you, they're going to buy a large ticket item like a coaching package or a large product or anything like that. What is the process they go through? And in neuromarketing, we break it down into 3 core areas of the brain. We understand that there's the reptilian brain, which is the basically the brain stem. So this is the part of the brain that is keeping you safe. So for all intents and purposes, we're pretty good at this as marketers. We're pretty good at dealing with this. We go, hey, because that reptilian brain is constantly looking for, is there anything I should be, like if I'm talking to Sean here, and Sean's selling me something, I'd be going, well, is there anything here that's out of order? Should I be worried about any of this?
Yep.
So it's not actually making a decision. It's not actually influencing the ability to make a decision, but it is opting out of a decision. Like that part of the brain goes, hang on, Sean's real dodgy here, which he totally isn't, by the way. But if Sean was dodgy, that part of the brain would activate and go, hey, something's not right here, back out of this decision. So we deal with that with things like trust badges, with social proof. We look, testimonials, all these kind of things that say, hey, this is legit. Don't worry about this. You're okay. And then we have the logical part of the brain, which is the neocortex. And this is the bit that everyone focuses on. And here's the mistake. This is where most marketers focus on, but also where most leaders focus on. So this is logic. And they look at things like, from a marketing perspective, we'll look at what are the features, what are the benefits, what is the pricing, why does this add up? And we often look at that with teams. If you're leading a team, we look at what are the pieces that need to happen here. What is the steps? What is the things? Like if I give them a pay rise, they're going to be happy. Well, maybe they won't. So all of these are the logical part of the brain. And we feel like the decisions are made in that part of the brain. But what we don't realize is they're not. They're made in the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. And then they're justified in the neocortex. And that limbic system, we deal with this, most marketers deal with this with what we call cognitive bias. So we use things like, so we want people to get out of that logical part of the brain into the emotional part. And we go, okay, if you're going to make a decision on something here, I don't want you to think too much about the benefits and the features, because then you're just comparing me with everyone else. I want you to take fast action. I want you to feel the emotion of this. I want you to be stirred up internally. So we use things like scarcity, so it's like, oh, you'll be one of only 5. And oh my goodness, so they buy into it. Or we use urgency, where it's like, hey, you've only got this offer for the next 10 minutes. I better hurry up and buy, even though logically that made no sense. And half the time, by the way, at the end of that 10 minutes is still available for the same price. You're just saying. But that's how we deal with that marketing, a lot of the different cognitive bias. But there's another layer to this. And I think this is the key that I found to leadership as well as marketing. And that was to understand the psychological needs of a human being. And for all of us, every single human has the same psychological needs. We're all individuals and we're all unique, but we're really not that unique. So, and if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he highlights this very carefully, which is you have all your safety needs, but when he gets to the psychological, it's 2 layers. It is community, like your sense of belonging, and then it is esteem. So it's your sense of contributing to that community, essentially. And these are built into us. We can't avoid this because they're built into us, because in the olden days, if you didn't belong to something, you were on your own. And guess what that meant? You would die. And if you weren't contributing, that next layer, if you weren't contributing and being a leader in that area, or being someone that's giving more to that tribe. If you were the weakest, you would be, banished, and therefore you're on your own and you would die. So it's built into us, these two psychological needs. And when you start to understand what that means, then you become a good leader. Because most marketers, when they tap into this area, they'll think, oh, that means I've got to create a Facebook group, create a community around this.
Right.
No, that's not what it means. What it means is whatever your product or your offering is, or whatever it is in your employment place as well, what does that say about the person? Like, what does it mean to me to be part of a team? What does it mean to me when I'm buying your product? And I'll give you a good example of this. I always use this example because I just freaking love this. I'm a huge whiskey fan, right? I love Scotch. In fact, I've just had my birthday. My son got me this very
expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My son got me this very expensive Caroon, very old Caroon whiskey, and oh my goodness, it's so delicious. But anyway, I'm a huge whiskey fan. I came across a Kickstarter many years ago that was for hip flasks. And these are special whiskey lover hip flasks. They are glass. They're not metal, right? So you don't get the taint of any of the metal in there, even though stainless, it's not, and silver, they're not supposed to taint it. They kind of do. So these were glass. You could sterilize them really quickly, which means that you could change from a 28-year-old Glendronach to a 25-year-old Macallan without any cross-contamination in there. They also have, they're really solid, even though they're made of glass. The curvature on them is really powerful. You could drop it and it won't shatter. And then it comes with a membrane around it as well to make it even stronger. But the membrane, how genius is this? The membrane has a slot in it, so you can actually see how much whiskey is in the.
There you go.
I mean, genius. Plus, it has these interchangeable cork inlays, all this kind of stuff. So I'm like, I need to buy this. So I backed that Kickstarter. I bought 2 of these things. They're in the other room right now. But here's the thing. So to me, all of those factors made me buy that hip flask, like that laundry list of why these things are so special. But here's the problem with that. None of that actually mattered. I've never used a hip flask in my life. I never have a need to use a hip flask. I drink whiskey at home and I just pour a dram from the bottle, or from a decanter. Yeah. So all of a sudden I realized it had nothing to do with all these logical reasons, because there was no logic to me buying this. In fact, in that time, I've only ever used it twice now. But that was because we were traveling somewhere local and I wanted to take some whiskey with me. One of them was on a local cruise ship, and I'm like, I want to take some whiskey with me, but I don't want to have to take a whole bottle, so I'll just do that. But the reason I bought them wasn't that. The reason I bought them is because all of those things I just said to you about why this is special make me part of a community. Because when you hear that, everyone listening to this, you did the same thing. You went, oh, well, Vince really does know a lot about whiskey. So he's a whiskey lover. So that says something about my personality, my identity, and I like being a whiskey lover. But then all of those things, most people don't even think about those things. So they're like, oh, wow, you must know a lot about whiskey, which, by the way, I don't. I just love whiskey. But it sounds like I do when I say things like that. So it said a lot about me and my sense of community and identity, but then it also added to that as well. If you can understand that, if you can start to get your head around that, that translates to leadership so strongly. When you have someone in your team and you understand really what they're about, not just pay rise or good working hours and good benefits. If you can understand what it says about them to be in that team, what it says about them to be in their role, that's when you will have employees that will overperform for you, and you will have those employees for life.
You will. Yeah. It's interesting as we work with a lot of different companies. Some companies have employees, teammates that have been there for decades, right? Yeah. That loyalty aspect, they're not going anywhere. Other companies, it's just constant churn.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, it is not whatever the product or service is of the organization. The product or service of the organization is 100% irrelevant to the loyalty aspect of it. It all goes to the leadership side, but even more than the leadership side, what you're talking about, do I feel like I belong here? Do I feel like I'm a part of something bigger than myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And this is a core thing that I had to learn whenever I started an organization. If I've inherited a team, the first thing I have to know is actually what is their identity? Like, what are they proud of? What are they, and a good example, I ran a digital marketing team. In fact, I had a number of different teams, but my digital marketing team at Cigna were incredible high performers. They weren't originally, but we built them up to be high performers because we started to understand their motivations. Like for 2 of them, they want to be positioned as thought leaders. It was important for them to get respect in their industry. So I was like, great. Well, those 2 are on a journey then where, I want them to get on stages and start talking about some of the work that we're doing, which
Yeah.
by the way, meant I had to give up being on stages at a few different events, which is, huge sacrifice for someone like me who loves being on stage. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. But the other thing is, I helped one of them write a book as well. And, for another one, they didn't want to be, they were happy being in the background. But what they really wanted to know is that they're adding more value. So for them, it was about, let's provide them with different opportunities to do something different. So, for example, they were a data analytics person. And one of the things I realized is that's a job that really does go nowhere. Like once you hit the pinnacle of that, you can't really go very far, and it's not a very high paying
Right.
job. So how can we add more value to them and their sense of identity? So we said, look, what's the areas you want to move into? And we looked at what they were fascinated about in marketing and gave them opportunities to upskill in different areas so that they became this incredibly skilled individual where they're not just specialized in one area. They had like 6 or 7 areas that they could contribute. So for them, it was about feeling like that they could contribute within the team. So yeah, understanding this is incredibly important.
I love that. But I think a lot of leaders struggle with this because it's counterintuitive, right? Because if I was going to take what you just said and I'm going to kind of like be very, very literal about it.
Yeah.
I hired somebody to do A.
Yep.
But in order for me to maintain them doing A, I need to open up the door for B and C. I don't even know what B and C are. But if I open up the door for B and C for them because they're telling me what it is A going to get done? And the point is, it seems counterintuitive, but if I open up the door for them to do what they're passionate about, what they want to grow into, they're going to do what they were hired to do with more passion and vigor also to free up time to do what you're allowing them to do.
Yeah. Plus, you have a team that are bought into what you're doing as well. And a good example is actually that person I was talking about where the data analytics person. And one of the things that they really were intrigued by is coding, and as an organization, we had a huge development team there.
Yeah.
The problem with that is going to the development team and saying, we need you to build out some HTML5 interactive ad units. They're like, no, we're building these giant SaaS-based applications for our business. And, you've got to go into the pipeline. It's going to take about 6 months. So what we discovered is there's a whole pile of developers in the business that could do this, but didn't have the time. I could do this, but it was stupid for the CMO to go and do it.
Yeah.
So we were paying a lot of money for our external agencies to build these things for us. So all of a sudden, this person pays a huge amount of interest in this. I start teaching him. We put him on a course and things as well. And next thing you know, we're actually saving money. Like we were saving, a few grand a month of him just being able to do this to kind of make his job more interesting. So it's incredible. And then you've not only got him bought into the vision of what you're trying to do there, but he starts thinking about how we could do things different. And that ownership piece is really powerful. That's the key to really a high-performing team is when they're taking ownership of their area and even more.
Absolutely. I love that. And it's about how we as leaders can impact them, people on our teams. But the one aspect you haven't really expressly stated, you've talked about it indirectly.
Yeah.
For a leader to be able to do that, we have to have the right heart and mindset that it's not about us, it's about them.
Oh yeah, we have to. I was never a fan of like a hierarchical kind of model. That being said, we tried with one of my previous startups. We tried a holocratic model. So we used, I think it's actually called holocratic. So it's similar to what Zappos and people like that use. That was the most difficult thing to ever. Where you don't have a hierarchy, you have areas of responsibilities, and you have co-leads on those and all this kind of thing. That was insanely difficult to manage, and we had such strong personalities in our business, it just wasn't working. So I reached out to Zappos and I reached out to, I can't remember, there's a few different companies. I said, look, I need your advice. You guys use this holocratic model. We're using this holocratic model. We're having all these conflicts in this area, but we don't seem to be able to resolve them. And the guy from Zappos turned around and said, yeah, that's because it sucks, man. The problem is we're kind of known for it now, so we have to keep committed to it. And I went, oh, right. And he goes, sometimes you need a leader. And I went, interesting. So what I discovered was what I really liked as a leadership model was the opposite of the hierarchical model. What it was is understanding your role as a leader. And this is a hard thing to get your head around, but as a leader, you are the lowest. Like the CEO of an organization is actually the lowest position in the organization because your most value is at the coalface. It's the people that are interacting with your customers, dealing with your customers and things like that. And your job my job as a chief marketing officer, I had my management team. My job was simple. how do I make their lives easy? How do I make it that I can facilitate them to work to the best of their ability? And guess what their job was? They all had teams. Their job was to be there for their teams. How can they facilitate their teams to do their best work possible? And if you think about it from that upside down pyramid approach, you've got to get out of your own way. And you do have to deal with your own insecurities. It's one of the most common things I see with leaders as well, where they're like, oh, but my team member's brighter than I am in this area. And you're like, yeah, that's good. That means you're a good leader. You should be hiring people way smarter than you. It doesn't diminish you. It's the opposite. So, yeah.
Exactly. Especially hiring people to fill your gaps, right? And that goes back to the self-awareness. I've got to know where I'm not good. Yeah. And it's not important for me as a leader to figure out where I'm not good and say, let's fix it. No, hire somebody else to take care of it for you. Let them deal with it. So you talked about insecurity for a second. And I know you talked about this before with me. Well, let's dive into it for a minute, because this goes back to some of the neuromarketing and neuroscience in general. Sure. My phrase for it is it's the human element that we're all the same, right? We all feel inadequate. We all feel insecure, but we don't view other people that way. We think that what we feel is unique and different, and you're realizing that really we are all the same. So dive into that a little bit and how that plays out at the workplace.
Oh man, I will take you back to young Vince here. So I grew up, as I said, in an abusive home, but I also grew up poor. And I had an opportunity when I was, I think it was late teens, late teens. It might have been 19 or 20 or something like that. I had the opportunity to go to a business breakfast. And, I'd always wanted to, even though, I had businesses when I'm 11, I still ended up in corporate life for a bit. But I really wanted to own my own business and everything. So I thought, this is amazing. I won this ticket to this business breakfast.
Nice.
And I'm like, first of all, breakfast. I mean, they're going to have food there. I couldn't afford anything back then. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to gorge on everything they've got. Drink all the coffee, eat all the food. Yep. But also they had a guy from Adobe, one of the leaders at Adobe speaking. And I'm like, I'm going to absorb everything here this person has. Now, here's the problem. I knew that I was going to a business breakfast. Everyone there was going to be in suits. I didn't own a suit. I barely owned any clothes. I went to a thrift shop and found the cheapest suit that I could find. Wow. It was silvery gray. It was disgusting looking. It was double-breasted, which I don't suit double-breasted. And to make it worse, it was ill-fitting. Like the sleeves went down to my lower knuckles and everything. And I had long hair at the time. I actually had hair at the time, which is a miracle. Yep. I had this long goatee, and I had this long hair that I tied back in a ponytail. I did not look great. But I turned up to this event knowing I had to make an effort. And I walked in there, and I'll be honest with you, I wanted to run out of there. I wanted to go and hide. I'm like, I don't belong here. Everyone there, in my mind, everyone there was wearing Armani or Tom Ford. Everyone there looked immaculate, and I felt like a slob. So, but I determined I've got this thing. I need the food. I was hungry, so that helped. Yep. So I got in there. I sat at this table, and I had my pen and paper, and I had my breakfast there. And it turns out when you don't have much food, it doesn't take much to get you full. So I didn't really make the most of that breakfast. But this guy was talking, and he was incredible. And I wrote down so many notes and everything. And at the end of his session, I was just like, I had pages and pages of notes. And I felt like at my table, everyone was just kind of, I was a bit disconnected from everyone there. But anyway, he started going around the room. And he just said, look, I'll come around each table and just ask if you've got any questions, and I can answer them for you. And I remember this internal dialogue in my brain going, okay, Vince, you got one shot here, man. Ask something intelligent. That's all I'm asking you to do, is ask something intelligent. And while I'm going through this dialogue in my head, I turn around and realize he's right next to me, and he goes, any questions? And then my mouth started talking, and my brain hadn't yet engaged. And I just said, at what point in your career did you know you'd made it? And then I could honestly hear my internal dialogue going, dude, you had one job. I'm out of here. It's just ridiculous. Stupid question. And I looked around the room, and people kind of, it looked like, anyway, it could be my own bias here, but it looked like people were kind of scoffing a little bit, like, what a stupid question. But he turned around, this guy, Jordan, he turned around and he said, oh, that is a great question. And I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, and I'm going to let you in on a secret. Now, the moment you hear that from someone you look up to, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm getting the secret. So I wrote down every word he said after that. He said, every morning I go through a routine. And I'm like, oh, I've heard about this. Leaders and their routines. This could be like the thing that makes or breaks me. So he said, every morning I wake up deliberately early. And I'm like, right, deliberately early. And he goes, I get up, I go straight to the bathroom. And I said, interesting, didn't check his emails or anything. Straight to the bathroom, right? So he goes, go in the bathroom, and I fill up the sink with cold water. And I thought, should I ask him what temperature? No, I'll just put down cold water. So I'm like, cold water. He goes, then I bend down, I splash that water in my face. I look in the mirror and I go, ha, today's the day they find out you're a fraud. And I went, what? And he goes, I've never felt like I've made it, Vince. I never will. He said, but he did the most amazing thing. He indicated around our whole table. He said, most people feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked around the table, everyone was nodding. And it was a revelation for me. It didn't suddenly cure me of all imposter syndrome or anything, but it was just this revelation that if we all feel that way, no matter what, me and my tacky little thrift shop suit, them and their, in my mind, Armani, and this guy who was, head of Adobe there, if all of us deal with imposter syndrome, then I've got as much right to be here as everybody else. And it was a great equalizer for me to understand that we are all the same. Yep. And that means that the little things that I struggle with, everyone else, and you and I talked beforehand before we were recording here, one of the fun things I always did with my teams is I go up to them and go, that moment where the boss is coming around and you suddenly have to look busy? Yeah, don't. Don't even bother. I don't expect you to be working 100% of the time. In fact, if you need to get up and go for a walk, get up and go for a damn walk. Clear your head. You can't be focused 100% of the time. And also, and here's a crazy thought, I don't actually expect you to know everything. And if you don't know something, just come and tell me you don't know it. And if I don't know it, we'll find out how to know it together. And I even explained to them, I'm considered one of the top 50 marketers in the world. I tell you now, there are basic principles of marketing that I probably don't know or screw up somehow. Yeah. It's fine. It's okay to be human.
There is so much rich thought behind all those things. And, as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking for our listeners, the different realms of imposter syndrome, right? Yep. The crazy thing about it is I've worked with a lot of leaders all the way up through CEOs that will own it with me privately. They don't necessarily own it publicly, but we'll work with them to try to begin to own that publicly too. But what's really interesting is I've been on a journey with some people level by level. Like I've been with them for a long time, so I've seen them promoted multiple times. They get promoted because they're effective leaders pulling the best out of their people. Yep. And then they get promoted and there's higher level responsibilities, which really just means it's a new team they have to lead.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something that's in their bailiwick as far as their knowledge for the technical side of it, but all of a sudden they feel like an imposter again. And then they begin to develop confidence. They get promoted again. Then they feel like an imposter again. So it ebbs and flows. And so the one thing I've learned in that process with some of these leaders is it's always there. Yeah. When you feel confident, you're just pushing it to the side. You're intentionally pushing it to the side because you actually feel like you have a grip on things. So I challenge entrepreneurs. I challenge new leaders, younger leaders. You're always going to feel like an imposter, but use that as a motivating factor. But I really love the fact that you're talking about we're all the same, right?
Yeah.
We really are all the same. We all feel inadequate. We all feel insecure. I'm hearing your story about going to that business breakfast and you go to buy the thrift suit and it doesn't fit and it's not right. You don't fit in. And I'm like, you're saying they're all in Armani's and stuff. You know where my mind went? Half of them charged out 2 months, 3 months of their salaries to buy this suit to try to fit in. And they're not going to make it because they think that how they look makes the difference, not who they are.
100%. I'm with you, man. Like honestly, and I encourage people, and this is going to sound random here, but I encourage people to embrace imposter syndrome because it's supposed to be there. And this is the thing we need to get our head around is what it actually is. And all it is our brain has a set of signals that says, hey, you're outside of your comfort zone. Sean, Vince, you guys are outside of your comfort zone right now. So I'm going to scare the crap out of you to get you back into your comfort zone. I'm going to tell you that everyone's going to see right through you. Everyone's going to know you're a fraud. Everyone's going to think you're just making this up as you go along. Now, here's the challenge with that. We are making this up as we go along. That's what pioneering does. That's what leadership does. You go ahead, which means you are cutting the path, So you're supposed to be doing this. And guess what? You're supposed to be outside your comfort zone. That is where growth happens. That's where breakthrough and learning and everything that is good, wealth and health and everything happens outside of your comfort zone. So if that's the case, then anytime those voices whisper at you, but mine don't tend to whisper at me. They kind of scream.
Yell.
Yeah. Kind of yell at me nonstop in my ears going, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Anytime they're doing that, we need to train ourselves to recognize that's a signal and go, oh, look, brain, I totally get what you're doing right now. And I super appreciate you. I super appreciate you trying to keep me safe. But you know what? This is actually where I need to be. You are, in fact, letting me know that I'm exactly where I need to be right now. And you know what? I've got this. It's okay.
Yeah.
So actually owning that and leaning into it and going, if I'm feeling imposter syndrome, that means I'm pushing myself. I'm out
Yep.
there. That's exactly what you're supposed to do.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hey, our time is wrapping up. I do want to focus in for a little bit on specifically what you're doing. So, Chase the Insights podcast, I had a chance to be a guest on there, but our listeners, our podcast listeners, obviously. So,
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about Chasing the Insights podcast, and listeners, I would encourage you to find it also on your listening platform and tune in with Vince and all his guests. But what's
Yeah.
the premise of it?
Oh, mate, I just have so much fun. It's literally just me getting super curious about entrepreneurs and
Mm-hmm.
and basically kind of extracting out of their brain all the insights that help us grow as entrepreneurs. Sometimes that's the stories they tell, sometimes it's their journey, sometimes it's their area of expertise, but it really is designed. My whole goal is to help entrepreneurs to thrive. And that's where we come from with this. So it's a very simple format, but it's very friendly and very conversational. And we have amazing guests on there, like Sean, funny enough. So only have the highest of
Thank
quality,
you.
of course. Yeah. Yeah.
This is where relationships make the difference, right? We can help one
Oh,
another out and push those things. Listeners, in the show notes for this episode, you'll find links to find Vince with his different businesses and Business Nine Magazine you can subscribe to. But in the end, life is relationships. And, I want to finish asking you a question. I think I know the answer to this one. This is totally off track from where we've been today, kind of. You're in Australia. I'm in the US. You've done business around the globe. I know you have over 100 countries listening to your podcast. Most entrepreneurs and business leaders think I can only do business in my country. Like, this idea of being global terrifies people.
Yeah.
Break down that wall for us.
Oh man, that's easy. I think part of the problem comes down to how we're taught marketing, funny enough, or how we're taught
Mm-hmm.
business, which is you need to understand the persona. You need to understand, the ICA or whatever you want to call it, the ideal customer avatar of who you're targeting. The problem with that is we do that based on demographics. We do that based
Right.
on I'm looking for women aged 35 to 45, based in suburban US who blah, 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 and all these kind of things. But actually, as entrepreneurs, we don't serve those people, we serve their needs. So if we understand that we're serving a need for a person, then really where they are in the world is irrelevant. Because
Yep.
funny enough, like we said, we're all the same. I
Exactly.
help people become thought leaders. As simple as that. I help position them as thought leaders. We help them write books. We help them be on podcasts, magazines, all sorts of things. So that need is pretty much everywhere. If you've got an entrepreneur that goes, hey, I know what the hell I'm doing, but for some reason I can't cut through in my market, I can't seem to stand out. Like, that's a problem that's in the US, Canada, Australia, Estonia,
Exactly.
the Philippines, anywhere. So
Yep.
if you understand that it's all based around needs, those barriers don't exist anymore.
And human needs the same everywhere we go. So,
Exactly. It always comes
all
back to it.
right.
Yeah.
Well, Vince, we finish every episode with the same question. So here we go. Quick tip. What is something our listeners can intentionally do today to lead more effectively?
Oh my goodness. Understand your brain. Actually start to think about how you're thinking. Like, look at your own insecurities and realize whatever those are, those things that you're embarrassed and ashamed about, guess what? Your team probably has that as well. So if
Yep.
you understand that, hey, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, then chances are they don't. So actually embrace that and say, look, like I said, you don't have to know everything. If you create a safe space around that for your team, you're also creating a safe space around that for yourself as well. And I think that's really important because honestly, especially with ADHD, ADHD comes a thing called RSD, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And you don't have to have ADHD to have that. I know so many people that have RSD.
Yep.
And the problem with that is it's self-prophesying because you go,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, they're going to reject me. Oh no, they don't think I'm any good, which is rubbish.
Right.
It's just you thinking you're not good. So therefore you pull away or you don't deliver or you procrastinate or all these self-sabotage things that happen until, funny enough, they go, wow, I'm not happy with your work. And you're like,
Yep.
I knew it all along. There we go.
Yep.
So understanding how your brain works means that you can actually deal with those situations a lot better. You can cut them off at the pass and things.
Great insights. Great tip. Well, listeners, I encourage you to reach out to Vince, listen to his podcast, pick up the magazine, because I know this for sure. You will be inspired to keep going after things. And for all the entrepreneurs listening, He's providing some incredible services to help you go to the next level. So I encourage you to do that. Vince, it has been a gift to have you on here today. Thanks for your time, your insights, and we look forward to having you back again sometime.
Man, I can honestly say it's an absolute honor. Anytime you and I catch up is always fun anyway, but this has been an absolute honor.
All right, listeners, thanks for tuning in today. I want to challenge you. It's one thing as you go. Be intentional today with one person. Go make an impact, go inspire them, and know you're making a difference. We'll talk to you in the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.